Greetings and welcome back to the channel, World War II Books, Where to Start. I'm your host, Axel Sally, but please call me Mildred. Sure, I've got a trial for treason coming up soon, but that's no reason why I can't have a good time in the town and tell you all about the worst books I read this year in World War II. Hey, they can't all be sinners, can they? Not unless you believe every 5-star rating on Goodreads anyway. No, some books have to be rated as yucky, not just in the sense of the subjectivity to each his own, but more in line of poor in presentation, false premises, revisionism, political agendas, poor research, poor editing, and most troublesome of all, gigantic ego getting in the way of a story well told, a story worth telling, a story not to be missed. And so each book in this year's crop falls prey to at least one of these, if not a few all at once. And so without any further ado, or any more heavy editorializing, let's hit the books. Alright, number 8, Hitler and Mussolini, The Forging of the Fascist Alliance by Christian Goschel from 2018, 386 pages total. If you've ever wanted to get inside the world of pomp and circumstance of the Reich and the Italian Empire, here's your chance to learn how it formed, shaped, and influenced the course of history. Or not. Choices of uniforms, flag displays, arrival sequences, military pomp, state dinners, telegrams, personal letters, signed photographs, effusive praise of each other. Goshel's going to try to wrap this all into a gift box of pretentiousness that moved the fate of nations. I personally don't get what the hell train schedules through the South Tyrol have to say about each dictator-style governance, nor what circling an airfield 3 times in order to land precisely to the minute stated in the protocol of the meeting has to do with, well, I can't get Britain out of the war, so I guess what the hell, I'll invade Russia instead. And that's the entirety of the premise of this study, that stage-managed propaganda, photo ops, and public speeches cemented this alliance and forged the axis of steel to take on the power of the Versailles Treaty and create the new order in Europe. I guess you're supposed to forget all the other stuff and just worry about the menu for dinner and what each leader had for dessert. Nope, no thank you. You can't sell me on this. Total waste of time. 1 star if I gotta. That's Hitler and Mussolini. Number 7, Victory at Sea by Paul Kennedy from 2022, 544 pages total. I once had great respect for Kennedy due to his rise and fall of the great powers that I read back in the previous century for a college course. But since then, well, not so much. His Engineers of Victory was a long and tedious experience. I read that shortly before starting this YouTube thing, and I had nearly forgotten it until I saw this title and said, well, what the hell, it can't be as bad as that one. And it's not really. It's simply that there's nothing new in here to be said that hasn't been said repeatedly for the last 40 years or so concerning the whys and wherefores of this topic. At that, it's a rather superficial study and falls prey to the deadly British trope of the March 43 crisis at sea that wasn't, paired with the odd theme of repeatedly stating the uselessness of the battleships, but then detailing what all the British battleships did during the war. I hardly need say it's ludicrously focused on the Royal Navy, and yes, well, those plucky Americans did okay in the war too, after the Brits showed them how it was to be done. Easily one of the worst of the year, 1 star if I gotta. That's Victory at Sea by Paul Kennedy. Nazi Titanic by Robert P. Watson from 2016, 312 pages. Marketing manna from heaven, this title. Honestly, it wouldn't have been the same punch if he had named it, say, Hitler's Titanic. This book tells the tale of the Cap Arcona, an interwar luxury liner plying the Atlantic and Mediterranean seas until the new war hits, and once trapped in the Baltic, she sits idle until one fateful day dear old Joey G decides the public needs a mood lifter in the form of a propaganda movie about how those evil plutocrats in Britain actually sank the Titanic, that's sure to drive audiences wild with delight. And so the Cap Arcona stands in for the doomed cruise liner, and the movie is at great length finished and then judged to be poor fodder for the propaganda machine after all, a big whoopsie on Joey's record. Cap Arcona, meanwhile, gets pressed in the service for the Reich's final days, carrying refugees across the Baltic in Operation Hannibal, and then acting as a prison ship for several thousand concentration camp prisoners who have been death marched west from territories being overrun by the Soviets. The ship is then bombed by the RAF in the final days of the war, resulting in the death of about 4,000 people. Watson fumbles and bumbles this tale with endless cliches and callbacks to earlier sections, dumbing down the plain as day story and making eyes roll with silly name drops. There's apparently little else that's been done on the Cap Arcona, so for the time being, this volume stands as necessary, but really it could have been, and hopefully will be done far better in the not so far future. That's 2 stars, reluctantly. That's The Nazi Titanic by Robert P. Watson. All right, number 5, I'm going to step up a notch in the yucky department. Death in the Baltic by Carolyn J. Prince from 2013, 256 pages. The tragedy of the Wilhelm Gustloff is better known now than it was when she wrote this book, and she gets on the scoreboard early for telling this tale for American audiences, though there was an older 1970s version by some Brits that's now out of print. Telling the story largely through interviews with the then still living survivors of the sinking, she's not cut out for the task. The text littered with inaccurate references, an extremely challenged notion of geography at times. There are chapters as raw as uncooked steak, muddled understanding the Soviet submarine's captain's wartime duties, and a pervading sense of pandering a raw draft as a fully fledged, ready for press manuscript. A for intent, D for effort, F for execution. I'd recommend Roger Morehouse's Ship of Fate over this one any day of the century. That's another 1-star affair, 1 star if I gotta. Death in the Baltic by Catherine J. Prince. Alrighty, Ghost of Honolulu by Mark Harmon and Leon Carroll Jr., 273 pages, 2023. Now, this is a different kind of thing. We're going to switch to celebrity authors, and it's a steady parade of eye rollers. Mark Harmon, capitalizing on his long-standing lead role on NCIS, brings us the tale of the first Japanese-American NCIS agent in American history stationed in Honolulu. He acted as translator during the interrogation of POW number 1 for the midget sub that tried to attack Pearl Harbor, and took part in other investigations during the war, and supposedly was hunting for the Japanese spy that was in the consulate there, but really, it wasn't much of a hunt. The guy got away clean and later put out a book that puts our intelligence community in a pretty bad light concerning how he hid in plain sight and was repatriated to Japan. This is a vanity project showcasing the perils of celebrity authorship. It hit the bestseller list, of course, on name recognition alone, but really it's a stunner in the bad sense. And in years to come, I expect to see gobs and gobs of copies of this in used bookstores. Superficial at best, another 1-star beast. That's Ghost of Honolulu. All right, number 3, Tailspin by John Armbruster, 448 pages from 2022. I mentioned this one has a dubious distinction of making my best of and worst of list this year, something I doubt would ever happen again. The good is the story of Gene Moran, the tail gunner whose B-17 was split in 2 over Germany in November of '43. Moran was trapped in the tail section and rode it down to a hard crash in the forest. He had the fortune to be taken to a POW camp where one of the prisoners was a doctor, and though badly banged up, he lived. Surviving nearly 2 years in the stalags, he made a home to take up his life and to make the best of it as he could. Armbruster is on solid ground with his story here, and he does fine with it, considering he's a teacher by trade and not a writer. But where he steps off the path and into the wilderness is his insistence on parading his personal family tragedy throughout the book and placing it on an even par with Gene's story, effectively smashing into our faces over and over again, never letting it go. I guess the notion that on a long enough timeline, everyone, and I mean everyone, will have a personal family medical tragedy occur in their lives, if not to themselves, never crossed his mind. And so he blithely plods onward, convinced we want to hear his story. I didn't. Not at all. It's galling to me that his ego demanded he parade this business before us, and really, that's the issue. His ego demanded it. It's not really about the death of his wife, is it? No, not at all. It's about him and what he went through. Worse than that, once Gene Moran dies, and he presses on Gene Moran dies and he presses on to finish the story, he has the temerity to state, "Now it was my story." That is absolute nonsense. You were commissioned by Gene's family to wingle his story out of it and maybe publish the resulting book, but never ever once did his story become yours. It's never about you. Never. Full stop. You stepped over the line into unmitigated arrogance to think that is your story. I can't understand for the life of me how Gene's family didn't have a fit when they read that bit, or for that matter, his editor in-house didn't slap the shit out of him for saying that in the manuscript. I can understand the agent saying, "Hey, this is a great angle. We can make gobs of money off it." But the editor and publishing house have a greater responsibility to the standards of nonfiction writing. As an example of how this thing is done right, with class, Go back to Unbroken by Laura Hillenbrand. She was suffering from a severe medical problem during the research and writing of the book, but never once in the manuscript did you ever find her referring to it. Never. It's only mentioned in the afterword when she is giving her acknowledgments to the people that helped her through it. That's how it's done. End of story. Jean's actual story makes my best of list this year. John Armbruster's Boo-Hoo-Hoo story gets the extremely poor judgment award in World War II nonfiction writing. That's Tailspin by that one guy. All right, Hitler's Last Days, Bill O'Reilly, 320 pages, 2015. Well-trampled territory here, and I mean stomped into the mud. Hell, there's got to be several dozen authors unable to resist the temptation to recount the bunker drama, some doing it one cigarette at a time. It can get quite ridiculous. So then naturally you ask, what can Bill O'Reilly add to this well-trodden path of World War II writing? Well, I'll tell you. He can talk a lot about Patton running through the Reich in the final days of the war. That's what he can add. Nope, not kidding. This tome is at least as much about Patton as it is about Der Fuhrer, set to a quick-set pace and never lingering long on anyone's scene. Back and forth we go, keeping the action flowing. I'd say there are more involved episodes of Hogan's Heroes than what we get here. And it's a clear case of, for this history doctor, to declare it a case, a celebrity author deficiency syndrome, otherwise known as CADS, striking once again. Sadly, at this time, there's no cure for this syndrome, and really the only treatment is not to read this tripe. That's Hitler's Last Days by Bill O'Reilly. Alrighty then, number one on the yucky list, Churchill, Hitler and the Unnecessary War by Patrick J. Buchanan from 2008, 544 total pages. And here we are at the bottom of the canyon with the worst of the worst I read this year in World War II writing, with an American political pundit on the rampage trying to convince us it was that dastardly villain Winston Churchill that made a simple little territorial dispute between Poland and Germany into a worldwide conflagration. He did it. Him, that guy, that Victorian dinosaur bastard did it. All his fault. Except, well, there's that Chamberlain guy that kind of has something to do with it too. And maybe that one dude in the Soviet Union that was all about a cheap land grab when he saw one. And then there's that French guy, Edouard Daladier, who said, sure, England will march. They might have had their hand in the pot too, stirring it just as vigorously as the next guy. And wait, where's Winnie? Where's Winnie? Has anyone seen him? Well, no, you haven't. He's in the cabinet, but he's no string puller this time. He's a bench player during all this fuss and bother. Buchanan goes through all the rigmarole of how the war came about, and you'll be hard-pressed to find the connection to Winnie while making it all happen. But there's plenty of character assassination along the way, so much so that this might as well be a spy thriller or an assassin's revenge novel. Buchanan spins the plates as fast as he can, looping in every little tiny event on the path of war there ever was, trying in vain to get us to take the hook and point the finger at Winnie. This might go over well with certain politicized readers/audiences, but as genuine historical and political analysis, it's just dirty cold hogwash stretched out to an absurd length. Once again, CADS strikes again and strikes hard. Best advice? Run away! And there you have it, the Parade of the Awful in 2025 reading in World War II. Man, that was a stunner. That was ugly. It was brutal, but we're finally through it. I'm glad to have it behind us. I'm Mildred Gillers, and I'm just released from my prison sentence for some ridiculous propaganda broadcast I made during the war. I got 12 years for that. Are you serious? It's absurd. I think I've had it with society, and I think Shakespeare said it best when he said, "Get thee to a nunnery." So I'm out of here. Until next time, I wish you happier reading.